Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating, honestly kind of complex piece of digital media. We're looking at a source that takes hard historical data about one of the darkest periods in human history and entirely blends it with heavily charged ideological claims. Understanding exactly how media constructs these dual narratives is an absolutely crucial skill, and we're going to break it all down step by step today.
To stay completely objective, here is our roadmap. We'll introduce the source, walk through the Holocaust timeline, look at the methods of persecution, the expanded victim count, and then finally, the source's ideological claims and its conclusion. We're going to strictly separate the historical events described in the video from the highly subjective arguments the creator makes later on.
All right, Section 1, Introduction to the Source. Let's see what we're actually dissecting today.
So we're analyzing a specific YouTube video called History of World War II in Urdu Hindi. It was uploaded by a channel named Discover the World. Now, this is primarily aimed at a South Asian audience, and it sets out to explain the Holocaust. But as you'll see, it's actually operating on two completely different tracks. It begins as a straightforward historical recount and then radically shifts into ideological commentary.
Moving to Section 2, the Holocaust timeline. The source starts off firmly rooted in a chronological path, so let's walk through it. Right off the bat, the video establishes a baseline. It notes that back in 1933, the Jewish population in Europe was at 90 lakh. That's 9 million people. This 9 million figure serves as the foundational data point for the tragedy they're about to detail.
From there, the video maps out a really horrifying progression. It starts with civil rights being stripped away in 1933, escalates through Hitler's speeches and the Nuremberg laws in 1935, and then leads right into the mass killings in Poland around 1939 and Russia in 1941. It wraps up this historical section by pointing out that by the end of the war in 1945, 2/3 of European Jews had been killed.
Section 3, Methods of Persecution. Here, the video dives into the specific, really systematic methods the Nazi regime used. It definitely doesn't shy away from the grim mechanics of history here. It outlines a chilling, step-by-step progression. First, stripping away civil rights and expelling people from schools and offices. Then, the horror of forced labor, starvation, and brutal medical experiments in the camps. Finally, it gets into the actual methods of mass extermination, specifically calling out the gas chambers and the intentional exposure of victims to the freezing Russian winter. What's really striking here is how the source emphasizes the massive, industrialized logistics behind all this. They point out the use of civil registries to methodically track down targets and the vast coordination of train networks for mass transport. They even highlight the construction of over 15,000 camps. 15,000! And they specifically mention the so-called euthanasia program targeting the disabled. It paints a vivid picture of a highly organized, state-sponsored operation.
Okay, Section 4, Expanding the Victim Count. Let's look at how the source broadens the definition of the Holocaust victims beyond what many people typically hear.
While it firmly acknowledges the 6 million Jewish victims, the video makes a very deliberate effort to introduce an additional 4 million victims from other backgrounds into its narrative framework.
The narrator breaks down exactly who makes up those other groups. They list the Roma people, around 2 lakh or 200,000 physically and mentally disabled individuals, and between 100,000 to 200,000 Freemasons. Interestingly, the video notes the Freemasons were forced to wear red clothing in the camps. They also list prisoners of war and political opponents, explaining how all these groups were swept into that exact same machinery of death.
So when you combine those groups, the 6 million and the 4 million, the source video pushes the total death toll of this systematic eradication to a staggering 1 crore. That's 10 million people. They are very deliberate in establishing this massive collective scale of human loss.
Which brings us to Section 5, the source's ideological claims. Now, this is the real pivot point of our explainer. This is where the source material drastically shifts gears, moving away from historical reporting and straight into highly controversial ideological commentary. We really have to ask ourselves, how exactly does the narrator reframe this historical tragedy? Because after establishing these horrific facts, the creator starts introducing heavy biases, using cultural tropes and religious justifications to completely flip how the audience is supposed to view the victims of the persecution we literally just detailed. This is where they totally depart from objective history. The narrator explicitly claims that no one in the world has a good opinion of the victims. And to back up this massive generalization, the video points to negative cultural tropes, specifically calling out Shakespeare's character Shylock to paint the victims in a universally negative light.
Then the creator leans heavily into religious texts to deepen this ideological framing. They list several theological accusations, claiming the victims are accused by the Quran of killing prophets and of attempting to assassinate Prophet Muhammad. The narrative also asserts they lived safely under Muslim rule for 1,000 years before turning against them. Ultimately, the video frames the atrocities of the 1940s as a form of divine punishment. Obviously, this is a profound shift from a historical timeline to a theological justification.
And the source goes even further to build this narrative, promoting outright anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. It directly claims that, quote, very large firms supplying weapons to both warring sides were owned by Jews. The video uses this unfounded claim to suggest the victims were financially orchestrating the very war destroying them, essentially blaming them for their own historical suffering.
Finally, Section 6, concluding the video's narrative. Let's look at how the creator attempts to tie these two drastically different halves together.
The video's ultimate goal actually merges these narratives perfectly. It uses the factual, historical tragedy of 10 million people being murdered as a vehicle to deliver a modern, ideologically charged geopolitical warning. It explicitly connects the history of the Holocaust to contemporary conflicts in Palestine, warning its audience that the victims of the past are now a threat in the present.
As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with a really vital question. When a media creator hooks an audience with undeniable historical facts, only to bait and switch them with intense, biased ideology, how does that alter our understanding of the truth? It's a stark reminder that media literacy isn't just about knowing the facts. It's about recognizing how those facts are being actively shaped, framed, and weaponized by the creators telling the story. So next time you're watching a historical deep dive, ask yourself, what is the real narrative running beneath the timeline?